Representative Jamie Santora.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, a couple questions. One, charter school. In the past two budgets, the governor had initiatives regarding charter school and charter school reform. I did not see anything similar in this budget. Does he still have that agenda, and where are you on it, and what types of reforms, if so, what would they be?
Absolutely. First, there's always a question as to where where does the Department of Education stand with charter schools? First, I'll put out there, very succinctly and directly, charter schools are public schools, and they're recognized and as public schools. So we have to work on a number, of opportunities as they relate to charter schools. First, in terms of charter school accountability, charter school laws are outdated. And they absolutely, there's an opportunity there, to look at some specific areas, such as special education funding as it relates to charter schools. Traditional public schools follow the recommendation of the new special education funding formula. Charter schools do not.
So on that, charter schools get, I believe, an average of what the school district spends on their students. In that average, are they including the kids that we spend $80,000 plus on to put in these special schools, or is that a separate tier? But do they also have those students in their charter schools?
So here's the interesting aspect of the special education funding formula. So all special education costs are included as part of the special education funding formula. The denominator is always up, is capped at 16% because that's the state average. So if a traditional public school has an 18, 19, 20% special education population, and it drives that that numerator higher because they're serving a larger number of special education students, you're still dividing that top number by that 16%, which then drives the total per student funding number higher. So I think that's one of the easier areas that we can start to engage in. And actually, it's one of the areas as we have discussions with really well-run charter schools. They'd love to see that addressed because they're kind of being painted with a broad brush in terms of the mismanagement. And those are charter schools that are doing a good job.
Thank you. On going into the shale tax that the governor proposed, I see nowhere where it's all dedicated to education. It's been talked about the last 3 years since 2014 when the governor was running. That would fund a lot of the gaps that one of my colleagues from, I believe it was Bucks County, spoke about earlier. I saw that in his projections, $700 million's coming in 2021. Had that all gone to education, we would, and running it through the new formula, we'd see a lot of good opportunity there. Do you agree with that? Did you have a conversation when you saw this shale tax come out and it wasn't dedicated to education?
Well, selfishly, I think all funding should come to education in the Commonwealth.
We're not all the way there, but.
So I always advocate to that end, right? And then at the end of the day, there are a number of other agencies that have needs and advocate as aggressively as I do to serve our constituents. But it continues to be one of those areas of that I advocate on behalf.
Well, keep advocating for that one. If it's going to happen, it should go to education. Otherwise, I just don't see a need for it. But putting that aside, the tax credit program, EITC, OSTC, I think I've said it in multiple hearings. I believe it benefits both public and non-public schools. More non-public in the scholarship side of things, and yes, there is some funding that's through EIOs and things that can go to the public schools, but more so in some of our most populated districts, it's keeping the class sizes down. I talked about blocks in Philadelphia, average scholarship $1,800. If $100 million gets cut out of the tax credit program, and a big chunk of that comes from the EITC, and those families cannot afford to send their kids to a non-public school, our public schools are going to be impacted. Have you thought about that and how you're going to be able to come up with the funding to be able to provide for those additional families that are going to have to attend public school because they can no longer afford the non-public school?
Yeah, not specifically to the impact of the funding. I understand that that's a conversation that the General Assembly and Governor continue to have. For us, what we've been looking specifically at is how to make sure that when allocated, when agreed upon and allocated, we get that funding out to schools, as quickly and efficiently as possible. So we stay ready to facilitate the transaction of those dollars as the Governor sees fit.
I'm done, but you should keep that in mind for the future with your planning, because if it gets cut, it's going to be a real problem for our public schools, especially our larger populated schools in poorer areas. Thank you.
Thank you.